Imagine being kidnapped and locked away for 15 years, with no explanation and no way to escape. I lived through that nightmare, but what if I told you that the real prison wasn't the room I was trapped in, it was the anger I carried with me. The pain, the thirst for revenge, it almost consumed me. But in the end, the biggest battle wasn't with the man who stole my life, it was with myself. It took me years to realize that true freedom comes from letting go, not from vengeance. Join me in this journey of discovering the truth, confronting my past, and learning the hardest lesson of all. If my story touches you, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Let's walk this path of healing together, because sometimes the hardest part of the journey is forgiving yourself. My name is Adam, and for most of my life, I was an ordinary man. I had a decent job, a comfortable apartment, and a routine that made me feel secure. I wasn't anyone special, but I was content. Life was predictable, simple, and that was enough for me. I didn't ask for more. But one day, everything changed. I remember it so clearly. Everything was normal that morning. The streets were busy as usual, people rushing to work, the hum of city life surrounding me. I had just finished a meeting at the office, headed to a coffee shop, and then it happened. The last thing I remember was stepping into the cafe, the warm aroma of coffee in the air, when suddenly, hands grabbed me from behind. Before I could react, a cloth was pressed to my face, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was disoriented, lying on a cold floor in a small, unfamiliar room. The light overhead was harsh and sterile. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, like I had been drugged. My throat was dry, and the smell of the room was suffocating, a mix of stale air and the faint smell of metal. I couldn't remember how I got here or why. I stood up, shakily, my legs weak beneath me. I searched the room, desperate for any sign of where I was. The walls were blank and made of concrete, no windows, no decorations, just a bare, empty space. There was a small metal cot in the corner, a single blanket tossed over it. A small bathroom area with a sink and a toilet sat at the other end of the room, but that was it. I rushed to the door, pounding on it with my fists. "Hello, is anyone out there?" I shouted, but there was no response. My heart raced as panic began to rise within me. The door didn't budge. I checked the small window in the door, but all I could see was blackness. I didn't know how long I had been there. Days, hours. Time had no meaning anymore. All I knew was that I had been taken. Someone had kidnapped me, and I had no idea why. In the first few days, I was consumed by fear. I tried to remember if I had made enemies, if I had done something to provoke someone, but nothing came to mind. I had always lived a simple, quiet life. No one had ever seemed to care about me enough to hurt me. So why was I here? Why had I been chosen? The silence around me was deafening. There were no guards, no sounds of footsteps, no voices. Just the eerie hum of the lights above and the silence that seemed to echo through the walls. It was as though the world had forgotten I existed. It was then that I began to realize something more terrifying was just a pawn in some twisted game. I didn't know who was playing or why, but I was a piece on a chessboard and I had no control. I was a mere spectator in a game of fate that I had never been prepared for. With each passing day, my frustration grew. I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to know who did this to me. I had to understand why my life had been stolen from me. But the more I tried to piece together the clues, the more I realized that the answers wouldn't come easily. And so I waited. I waited for something, anything, to tell me why this was happening. I waited for my captors to make their move, because deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The days blurred together. At first, I tried to keep track of time, marking each day on the wall with a small scratch, but the numbers soon lost meaning. The darkness was my constant companion, and the walls of my small cell, which had once seemed so foreign, became my entire world. There was nothing outside. No voices, no windows, no way of knowing what was happening in the world beyond my confinement. I was utterly alone. The isolation was suffocating. I had no idea if anyone was looking for me, if anyone cared. My mind started to drift, and memories of my life before this nightmare became faint and distant, like old photographs left out in the rain. My family, my friends, all of them seemed to fade away. I used to have a life, at least, I think I did. I would try to recall the details of my past, the faces of people I loved, but they slipped through my fingers like sand. The more I tried to remember, the more everything felt unreal, as if I was a different person entirely. I could almost see the faces of my parents, my old apartment, the routine of my daily life. But the more I tried to hold on to them, the more they dissolved into nothing. I stopped fighting it. There was no point in clinging to memories that were vanishing like smoke. Instead, I began to focus on what I could control. The silence was deafening, and I needed something to anchor myself to. I started writing anything that came to mind, anything that I could remember. Every night, I would sit on the cold floor and scribble in the corner of the room on any scrap of paper I could find. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, but slowly it became my lifeline. Writing gave me a sense of purpose, even if I was the only one reading it. I wrote about the small details that I could still recall, the way the sun used to feel on my face, the taste of my mother's cooking, the sound of laughter from my old friends. I wrote about the things I hoped for: freedom, escape, reunion. But most of all, I wrote about the person I used to be. Every entry, every note was a way of holding on to myself, of refusing to let go completely. In the silence of my cell, those words were all I had left. They were my connection to a world I wasn't sure existed anymore. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I would hear noises, faint footsteps, or muffled voices, and my heart would race with the hope that someone was coming for me. But every time, the sounds would disappear as quickly as they came, and I would be left with nothing but the emptiness, the loneliness that threatened to consume me. But despite the darkness, despite the crushing weight of solitude, a part of me refused to break. I couldn't. I didn't know how long I would be here, how long I would be kept in the dark, but I wasn't going to let myself forget who I was. I wasn't going to let this place erase me completely. I had to believe that one day someone would come. Someone would find me, and until then, I would hold on to what was left of myself, the memories, the writing, and the faint hope that someday, somehow, I would escape. I had no idea why or how, but one day, after 15 long years of captivity, I found myself standing in the middle of the city. The room I had called home for more than a decade was gone, and so was the suffocating silence that had haunted me. I was no longer locked behind the cold walls that had once defined my existence. Instead, I was outside. The sunlight felt almost painful on my skin, as if I had forgotten what it was like to be free. They didn't give me any explanation, no answers. They didn't even tell me why I was held for so long, or who was behind it. The door to my cell had just opened, and I was escorted into the world that had moved on without me. The city looked different, yet somehow the same. People walked by, oblivious to the fact that I had just been released from a nightmare. They carried on with their lives as if nothing had changed, while I stood there, lost in a world that felt foreign. I was given nothing. No money, no identification, nothing. Just a phone and a vague warning to go and live. But how could I live when I had no idea what had happened to me? How could I even begin to understand why I had been taken in the first place? I stumbled through the unfamiliar streets, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it all. 15 years gone, just like that. Was anyone looking for me? Was my family still out there? Had they forgotten about me? The questions piled up, each one more suffocating than the last. I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen my parents, my friends. Everything was a haze, a blur of images that didn't make sense anymore. I tried calling a few numbers, hoping to find someone who could give me a clue, but each call was met with silence. I couldn't even recall my own voice when I left a message. It was as if I had been erased. I had nothing to go back to. My past was gone, and I was left with nothing but uncertainty. But even amidst all the confusion, something else began to stir inside me. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge in years. Anger. A deep, gnawing anger that I had spent too long suppressing. They had stolen my life from me. Someone out there had made this happen, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I needed answers. I needed to know who had done this to me, why I was targeted, and most importantly, who was behind it. The world had changed around me, but I wasn't going to sit idly by. I couldn't. The first step was finding the truth. I didn't know where to start, but I had to begin somewhere. I started tracking down old contacts, trying to piece together my life. There had to be someone out there who knew what happened to me. And when I found them, when I found the person or people who had orchestrated this twisted game, there would be no mercy. My freedom had just begun, but in my heart, a new mission was taking shape. A mission driven by the need for justice, for revenge. No one would get away with taking 15 years from me. I would find them, and I would make them pay. With my freedom in hand, the first thing I did was search for answers. I couldn't stand the uncertainty. 15 years of my life were taken from me, and I needed to know why. I couldn't shake the feeling that my kidnapping wasn't a random act. It had to be part of something bigger, something planned. Someone had targeted me, someone with a purpose, and I would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. I started by trying to gather any trace of my past. The world had moved on without me, but I was determined to find clues, to dig up the remnants of my old life. I contacted a few old acquaintances, but it became painfully clear that they had either moved on or forgotten about me. Some didn't even remember me, as if I had never existed. That realization stung more than I wanted to admit. It was then that I turned to the only thing I had, the skills I had developed during my years in captivity. Time had passed, but the hunger for survival had never left me. I had spent years in a small, windowless room, learning how to survive, learning how to read people, learning how to notice the smallest details. Those years hadn't been completely wasted. They had made me more resourceful, more observant, more capable than I had ever realized. I used those skills now, searching for any trace of information that might lead me to the person behind my imprisonment. I began digging into records, tracking down people who might know something about my captors, and sifting through anything I could find. But the more I searched, the more I realized how carefully my captors had covered their tracks. It was as if they had erased every trace of themselves, leaving me with nothing but confusion. But as I kept digging, I stumbled upon a name, James. It was a name that didn't ring any bells at first. I had never heard it before, but there was something about it that kept me from moving on. I found references to him in old news articles, reports of a scandal that had rocked the city years ago. It had something to do with a tragic event, an accident that had left many lives shattered. The pieces of the puzzle slowly began to come together, but what I found was horrifying. James wasn't just some random person. He was someone with power, someone with a vendetta. The scandal I had uncovered wasn't just a story, it was personal. The accident that had set everything in motion had been my fault, or so it seemed. The more I dug, the more I realized that my past was entangled in a web of lies, betrayal, and pain that I had never fully understood. I couldn't believe what I was learning. The more I uncovered, the more twisted the story became. I had been involved in a car accident years ago, a mistake that had led to the death of someone close to James. I didn't remember it, not fully, but there were details now coming back to me, flashes of memories that I had blocked out. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but it didn't stop the growing rage inside me. James' plan was clear now. My captivity, my suffering, it was all part of his revenge. He had made me a pawn in his game, and I had no idea why he had chosen me. But I would find out. I had to. The truth was out there, and I was going to track it down, no matter where it led. With every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, my desire for revenge grew stronger. James had taken everything from my freedom, my memories, my life, and now it was time to take it all back. Now that I was free, the weight of uncertainty still hung over me like a dark cloud. I walked through the streets, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of a world I no longer recognized. It was as if I had stepped into someone else's life, one that moved on without me. But I couldn't afford to dwell on the confusion of my surroundings. There was only one thing on my mind: finding the truth. I needed answers, and no matter how long it took or how painful it might be, I would find them. The first step was to track down the people who could help me understand why I was taken, why my life had been stolen. But the more I looked, the more the mystery deepened. I reached out to former colleagues, people who might remember me, but most of them had either moved on or forgotten I ever existed. It was as if my entire past had been wiped clean, and I was left with nothing but the fog of confusion. I couldn't stop there. I knew I had to dig deeper. Over the years, I had learned how to survive, how to gather information, how to make use of whatever scraps of knowledge I could find. My captors had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, but I had changed in those 15 years. I had become resourceful, determined. I began searching through old news reports, legal documents, anything I could find that might point to my captors. That's when I stumbled upon a name, James. At first, it meant nothing to me, but as I dug further, I began to uncover connections between his name and an incident from my past. Something I had completely forgotten, nor maybe something I had blocked out. It was a scandal, one that had made headlines years ago. A tragic accident that had ruined lives, including James. The details were blurry, but I could sense the weight of the story. I couldn't remember much, but the more I learned, the clearer it became. My captivity wasn't a random act. It was part of a larger plan, a personal vendetta. James had targeted me, and I still had no idea why. The investigation continued, and with each discovery, a more horrifying picture began to emerge. The accident I had been involved in, it wasn't an accident at all. It was the catalyst for everything. Somehow, I had caused the death of James' loved one, but I didn't remember it. How could I have forgotten something so monumental? The guilt began to eat away at me. But even as the truth was revealed, my anger grew stronger. I had been trapped in this twisted game for far too long, and now that I knew the reason behind it, I felt an even greater thirst for vengeance. The more I dug, the more I realized just how carefully orchestrated this entire plan had been. James had watched me for years, carefully monitoring my every move. He had been pulling the strings, setting the stage for his revenge. But what I couldn't understand was why he had chosen me. I wasn't anyone special. I wasn't a criminal. So why had I become the target of his wrath? One thing was clear: I was no longer just a victim. I was part of a much larger story, one that had been written long before I ever entered this nightmare, and now I was going to finish it. With every clue that fell into place, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't going to be a pawn in this game anymore. It was time to take control. The search for the truth was just the beginning. Now I needed to confront James face to face, and when I did, there would be no turning back. The deeper I delved into my past, the darker the truth became. My investigation into the identity of my captor had led me to a man I never thought I'd encounter: John Williams. At first, his name didn't ring any bells. But as I uncovered more about his life, a chilling realization struck me. John Williams wasn't just some random person. He was a man of power, wealth, influence, and connections that stretched into every corner of the city. He had made a name for himself in business and politics. But beneath the surface of his success, there was something far more sinister. As I pieced together the details of his life, it became clear that my abduction was not some random act of cruelty. No, I was caught in a web of revenge, carefully spun by a man who had been planning this for years, and the reason behind it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The key to understanding it all lay in a tragic event from my past: an accident. I didn't remember the accident at first. The details were hazy, blurred by time and trauma. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized that I had been involved in something far more horrific than I had ever realized. It was a car crash, a fatal one, and I was behind the wheel. I had never fully processed what had happened that day, the chaos, the lives destroyed. But now, as the memories began to resurface, the guilt flooded over me like a tidal wave. I had been involved in the accident, but I didn't remember causing it. My mind had locked it away, keeping it hidden, perhaps because it was too much to bear. John Williams had lost someone in that crash. A loved one, someone close to him, had died, and I had been the one who was responsible, at least in his eyes. The guilt I was feeling now was overwhelming, but I couldn't deny that this was the reason I was here, trapped in this nightmare. This was why I had been chosen as his target. It was clear now. John's obsession with revenge wasn't just about the accident itself. No, he had made me the center of his plan, taking everything from me: my freedom, my memories, my life. He had orchestrated my abduction, my confinement, and everything else that followed. But the more I learned about him, the more I realized that I was only one piece of the puzzle. The truth about John Williams's motivations made my stomach churn. The man I had once believed to be a mere figure of power was, in reality, a man driven by deep pain and loss. His thirst for vengeance had shaped his every decision, and I had become the object of his fury. But there was more to uncover. I couldn't stop now. As the puzzle pieces slowly fell into place, I realized that John's plan wasn't just about torturing me physically. It was about something far more personal, far deeper than I had ever expected. I had to face my past. I had to face the memories I had buried deep inside. I wasn't just going to be a victim anymore. I was going to take control. I was going to confront John Williams, and make him pay for what he had done. But before that, I had to confront the darkest part of myself, the part of me that had caused the accident, the part of me that had unwittingly set this all in motion. The truth was darker than I could have ever imagined, and now I had to decide what to do with it. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to lead to another, and with each new clue, the picture that emerged became darker and more twisted. Olivia and I had been digging into John Williams's past for weeks, connecting dots that once seemed unrelated, but now, the web of deception and manipulation was becoming clear. The truth was far more complicated than I could have ever imagined, and the realization hit me like a freight train. Olivia, ever the sharp investigator, had found a crucial connection. John's obsession with me wasn't just about the accident. It was deeper than that, rooted in something more personal. As we uncovered more about John's history, we learned that he had orchestrated everything meticulously, building a twisted game where I was the unwitting pawn. It began with the accident, of course, but that was just the beginning. John had known me, or rather, he had been watching me long before the crash. It seemed that he had a history with my family, though I couldn't remember any details. A business deal gone wrong? An old grudge? It didn't matter. The important part was that the accident wasn't just an unfortunate event, it was a premeditated part of a much larger plan. John had carefully crafted every detail of my life's destruction. From the moment the accident happened, it became the trigger for everything that followed. He had been planning his revenge for years, and I had been chosen as the target because of a connection I didn't even realize existed. With each document we uncovered, the story became more chilling. I learned that John had manipulated everyone around me, my friends, my colleagues, even my family, without their knowledge. He had orchestrated my abduction, the isolation, the years of suffering, all as part of his sick revenge for a wrong I didn't even remember committing. "Look at this," Olivia said, her voice tight with urgency as she handed me a folder. "It's all connected. The company you used to work for, John, had a stake in it. He knew everything about you, Adam, your every move." I glanced at the documents, my heart racing. The more I read, the more the scope of John's manipulation became apparent. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a game of power. A game where I was never meant to be anything more than a piece on a board. He wanted to control me, control my life, and break me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I felt like I was being suffocated by the weight of the truth. Every step of my life had been steered by forces I couldn't see, by a man who had made me a tool for his cruel satisfaction. The anger inside me surged to new heights. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen this before? The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, but the need for retribution was even stronger. "We need to find him," I said, my voice cold with resolve. "We need to end this game." Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and concern. "We will, but Adam, it's not just him we need to be careful of. He's not working alone. There are people who have been helping him, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure the truth never comes out." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. John had set traps for me all along, and now, it seemed, I was walking straight into one. But I couldn't stop. Not now. The truth was out there, and I would do whatever it took to expose it. Every new discovery added more layers to the game that John had set in motion. But the more I learned, the more I realized that the game wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control, about power, and about breaking me completely. But I wasn't going to let him win. I would tear down everything he had built and expose the truth for the world to see. The battle was just beginning, and this time, I wasn't just playing to survive. I was playing to destroy him. The moment had finally arrived. I stood across from him, staring into the cold eyes of John Williams. The man who had torn my life apart. The man who had orchestrated my suffering for years. The room was dimly lit, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Every fiber of my being was ready for this moment. I had hunted him down, followed every clue, faced every obstacle, and now, here we were, face to face. "Why?" I demanded, my voice steady but filled with years of accumulated anger. "Why me, John? What did I ever do to you?" John smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was pleased. It was the smile of a man who had been planning this for far too long, a smile that sent a chill down my spine. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "You don't remember, do you?" His voice was calm, almost taunting. "You were the reason for everything. The reason my family was destroyed. The reason my life was shattered." He told me the story, how it all started with the car accident. How I had been behind the wheel, unknowingly causing the death of someone dear to him. I had no memory of that moment, of that night. The accident had been just that, mistake, a horrible accident. But to John, it was the catalyst for everything. He had watched me, manipulated me, and used my confusion as part of his elaborate scheme for revenge. "You were just a child," John continued, his tone now dark with contempt. "But to me, you were the one who took it all away, the one who stole everything." The truth hit me like a freight train. All these years of pain, of imprisonment, had been because of something I didn't even remember doing. My mind had blocked out the memory, but in John's eyes, I had caused the devastation that ruined his family. And now, he had made me pay for it, not with one swift strike, but with 15 years of suffering. I had been his puppet, his pawn, and I hadn't even known the game I was playing. I was supposed to hate him, to destroy him. But as I stood there, looking at the man who had ruined my life, I realized something even more painful. My thirst for revenge had consumed me, just as it had consumed him. I had become the very thing I hated. I had lost sight of who I was, of what I once stood for. I had sacrificed everything in pursuit of vengeance. "John," I said quietly, the weight of my realization sinking in, "you've taken everything from me, but I've become a monster in the process. I've let you win." John's expression hardened. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," I replied, my voice shaky with a mix of guilt and realization, "I've become just like you, filled with anger, consumed by vengeance. I've lost myself in this game, and I've lost everything that truly mattered, my family, my humanity." John stared at me, confused for a moment, but then his lips twisted into a sneer. "You think this is about redemption, about healing? You'll never change. You'll always be a pawn in someone's game." But the truth was, I had already made my choice. I couldn't allow myself to become what John had become. Man so consumed by hatred that he lost sight of everything else. I knew what I had to do. I stepped back, my mind clear for the first time in years. "This ends now, John," I said. "Not with more bloodshed, not with more revenge. I'm walking away." John's eyes flashed with fury, but I didn't care. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving the man who had destroyed my life behind. For the first time, I was no longer a pawn. I was taking control of my own fate. The pain, the anger, the thirst for revenge was all still there. But I knew one thing now. To move forward, I had to let go of the past. And with that, I took the first step toward healing, toward finding the man I used to be. I had tracked him down, cornered him, The time had come for John Williams to face the consequences of his actions. After all the years of suffering, all the years of pain and anger, I was finally standing before him. The man who had made me a prisoner, the man who had stolen my life, my memories, he was here, in front of me. The tension in the air was palpable, each breath heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step toward him. I had no more questions, no more doubts. It was time for justice, time for revenge. You, I said, my voice low but filled with years of anger, you've taken everything from me, and now it's my turn. John looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was neither fear nor guilt, just a strange, cold calmness. His hands were clasped together, his eyes narrowing, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. You think this ends with you confronting me? John's voice was smooth, almost dismissive, but there was a glimmer of something else, something I couldn't place. I didn't wait for him to finish. You ruined my life. You made me a part of your sick game for years. I won't let you go unpunished. The words hung in the air, thick with finality. But then, in a twist of fate I never saw coming, John spoke again, and his next words shattered everything I thought I knew. You're wrong, he said softly. You've been playing the wrong game, Adam. All these years, you've been chasing after revenge, but the truth is, I wasn't the one who orchestrated everything. You were. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I staggered backward, unable to comprehend what he was saying. What are you talking about? I demanded, my voice shaky. John's face twisted into a grim smile. The accident, Adam, the accident that started all of this wasn't just fate. It was a plan you were a part of. You don't remember, do you? The truth is, you were always meant to be the catalyst for everything. The accident wasn't just an accident. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something I set in motion long ago. I felt my blood run cold. You're lying, I spat, my mind racing. You're trying to twist this around. No, Adam, he interrupted, his voice strangely calm. The truth is, you were never a victim. You were always a pawn in this. Your involvement in that crash wasn't a mistake, was part of a much larger scheme. You think I was the one pulling the strings. No, you've been playing right into the hands of someone else all along. I could barely breathe. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together the fragments of information that didn't make sense. Who is behind this? I whispered, my voice barely audible. John leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. You'll find out soon enough, he said, his words laced with a sinister finality. In that moment, everything I had known, everything I had fought for, was turned upside down. The game I had thought I was playing, the quest for revenge. The pursuit of justice was nothing more than a distraction, a carefully constructed illusion. I wasn't the one seeking vengeance. I was the one being controlled. The realization hit me harder than any punch could. I wasn't free. I had never been free. All of this, the pain, the suffering, was part of someone else's design. I had been manipulated into chasing after something that didn't matter, something that had already been decided for me. As I stood there, the weight of it all crashing down on me, I had to make a choice. The game had changed again, and it was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. And if I had any chance of escaping this cycle, I needed to let go of the past. I needed to stop playing the game. But that was the hardest decision I'd ever had to make. And in that moment, I realized that the most dangerous part of all of this wasn't John. It was the truth, that I had become the very thing I had hated. The final confrontation was inevitable. It was a moment that I had anticipated for years, one that I had trained myself for, lived for, standing face to face with James, the man who had destroyed everything I once held dear. I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on me. Every moment of suffering, every painful memory, every bit of anguish that had fueled my desire for revenge was about to culminate in this very instance. The air was thick with tension. James stood before me, his cold eyes filled with the same determination that had driven him to orchestrate this entire nightmare. I had thought, for so long, that this moment would give me the closure I sought. I believed that once I finally confronted him, once I finally made him pay for the torment he had caused, I would be able to move on. But as I stood there, something inside me shifted. The rage that had once been my only companion started to wane, replaced by an unsettling realization. James wasn't the monster I had created in my mind. No, he was a man who had been as consumed by his pain as I had been by mine. He wasn't just my enemy, he was a reflection of the very thing I had become, a prisoner of vengeance. "Do you know what it feels like to lose everything?" James asked, his voice low but cutting through the silence. "To watch your entire world fall apart because of a single moment, a single mistake." I clenched my fists, anger rising again. "I know exactly what it feels like," I spat, my voice shaky with emotion. "And you?" "No, you don't," he interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "You don't understand what it's like to be consumed by the need to make someone else pay. You don't understand how it eats away at you until nothing is left but the obsession." His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Was he right? Had my thirst for revenge, my obsessive pursuit of justice, turned me into something I no longer recognized? In my attempt to destroy him, had I lost myself? I had been so focused on making him pay for what he did to me that I hadn't stopped to consider the cost of my own actions. The truth, however painful, was unavoidable. Revenge had already taken its toll on me. I had become someone I couldn't recognize, man driven by hatred, whose life had been overshadowed by the very thing that had once been a catalyst for my own downfall. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to find clarity in the storm of emotions that had overwhelmed me for so long. The pain of my past, the agony of the years lost it, was all still there, but something had changed. Something inside me had shifted. I looked at James, really looked at him for the first time. The man standing before me wasn't my tormentor. He was a man who had been broken just like me. He had been hurt just like I had. And while that didn't justify what he had done, I realized it didn't have to define me. It didn't have to control me. "You've taken everything from me," I said, my voice steady now. "But I'm not going to let you take any more. I won't let you turn me into what you are." James' eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "Then what will you do?" I took another deep breath. "I won't seek revenge anymore. I'm done." The words were like a weight lifted off my chest. Saying them wasn't easy, but in that moment, I knew it was the only way forward. The price of revenge had been too high. It had cost me my humanity, my peace, and in the end, it would have cost me my soul. I turned my back on him, walking away from the life I had known. The past couldn't be undone, and the scars would remain. But I could choose a different path. I could choose to let go of the anger, the hatred, and find something better than vengeance. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do isn't to fight, it's to forgive. The weight of everything of the past, of the anger, of the years' waste, began to lift as I walked away from the ruins I had been chasing for so long. The final confrontation with John Williams had been more than just a battle between two men. It had been a battle for my soul. For so long, I had clung to the idea of revenge, convinced that it was the only way to reclaim what had been stolen from me. But in the end, I realized that revenge hadn't given me freedom, had chained me to the very pain I was trying to escape. Now, for the first time in years, I felt something different, a sense of peace. The relentless pursuit of vengeance had consumed my every thought, but it had never brought me the closure I had expected. Instead, it had left me hollow, a shadow of the man I once was. I wasn't the same person anymore, but that didn't mean I had to remain the same. I could still change. I could still find my way back to the person I was meant to be. As I walked away from John's mansion, the bitterness that had clouded my mind began to fade. It wasn't easy. The anger was still there, buried beneath the surface, but I had learned something crucial over the past few weeks. Holding on to hatred, holding on to the past, only kept me in chains. It was the act of letting go, of forgiving, that would truly set me free. I didn't need to forgive John Atlees, not for him. I needed to forgive myself. I needed to release the weight of guilt and shame that had haunted me for so long. I had made mistakes, but I couldn't keep punishing myself for them. I had been a prisoner to my own anger, and now, for the first time, I was choosing to set myself free. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. The past still lingered in my memories, but the more I let go of the anger, the easier it became to move forward. I found myself slowly rebuilding the pieces of my life. It wasn't a perfect journey. There would be scars, there would be days of doubt, but I was free. I was no longer trapped by the chains of revenge. I started fresh. I didn't know where the future would take me, but I knew that I had the power to choose my path. I could build a new life, one that wasn't defined by pain and revenge. I didn't need to be the man who sought vengeance. I could be the man who learned to forgive, to let go, and to live in peace. And that's when I realized something even more profound. Freedom wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about embracing the present. It was about choosing happiness, choosing peace, and choosing to live for what mattered now, not for what had been lost. The darkest memories began to fade, their power over me weakening with each passing day. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by the choices I made moving forward. I was no longer a prisoner of the past. I had found my peace. I had found my freedom, and that, I realized, was all I ever needed. This story teaches us that revenge, no matter how justified it may seem, only perpetuates pain and suffering. Adam's journey of captivity, anger, and vengeance shows how a single obsession can consume a person, turning them into someone they never intended to become. In his pursuit of justice, Adam lost sight of his humanity, his peace, and his future. The true lesson is that forgiveness, starting with ourselves, holds the power to set us free. Holding on to hatred keeps us locked in a cycle of destruction. By choosing to forgive, not for the sake of others, but for our own well-being, we find the freedom to heal and move forward. In the end, Adam realized that peace doesn't come from seeking revenge or fixing the past. It comes from letting go, choosing to embrace the present, and forgiving ourselves for the mistakes we've made. Life isn't defined by the wrongs done to us, but by how we choose to live after those wrongs. True strength lies not in holding on to anger, but in the courage to let go and choose a better path forward.